So last night I saw the movie Blink Twice, directed by Zoe Kravitz, and I thought she did a really good job with it, pulling off so many different genres at once, which is never easy. It's also a very detailed and complex film that can lead to a lot of unanswered questions, and I want to answer all of them. Like the red gift bags, the perfume, Jess's disappearance, the green lizard, the big twist, the social commentary, the psychology of many of the characters, and the meaning of the ending. So let's just get into it from the very beginning to the very end. So just to establish what this film is about, I want to cite a quote from writer-director herself, Zoe Kravitz, when asked what was the spark in her mind that motivated her to make this movie. Her answer was wanting to explore power and taking back power, and wanting to explore how absurd it is that women are asked to forget and pretend and smile through pain, to speak through our eyes because we can't say it out loud, and really wanting to highlight how insane that is. So what Kravitz is ultimately saying, and I'm sure you can pick this up from the movie itself, is that the movie is about women reclaiming and defending their power that they have uniquely as women, i.e. their agency, their sexuality, their intuition, their compassion, and their unique voice. And very importantly, at the same time, breaking free from the societal conditions and temptations that often make them very vulnerable to manipulative men. And this central theme is established in the very first conversation in the film, when Frida and Jess talk about an unkind ex-boyfriend who Jess keeps going back to when he calls her for 3 a.m. hookups. Frida tells Jess, "Stop giving away your power," and Jess says, "I'm just scared of being alone." And that idea moves us right into our introduction to Slater, Frida's romantic interest. Slater shows interest in Frida, and Frida is elated by this. She can't believe it. And even though Frida knows Slater has a history of abuse of power, she is still swept up by the fact that there's a chance that a handsome tech billionaire could lift her out of her financial issues, her loneliness, and the chaos of her everyday life. So the advice she gave to Jess is put to the test with herself at a way greater and much more tempting scale. And pretty soon, this extravagant fantasy comes to fruition as Slater invites Jess and Frida to his new island. So once the girls get to the island, the life they're living is the opposite of their life at home. They're completely taken care of in every way possible in a life of luxury and good company. The only person that seems to have an issue with Frida is Sarah, who is also most interested in Slater romantically. But besides this, it's a really good time because everyone's partying, eating, drinking, socializing, and sleeping well. It's perfect. However, weird things start to happen when Frida stains her dress, but later that night, the stain is gone. And when Frida sees her housekeeper, the housekeeper seems to recognize her and keeps calling her Red Rabbit. Frida is also suddenly noticing dirt under her nails in the morning, and as each night goes by, the men on the island seem to get a little more eerie, making dismissive comments and looking at the women just a little longer than usual. And the biggest change that really begins the turn of this film is when Jess goes missing, and none of the other girls actually remember who Jess is, except for Frida, of course. So of course, when Frida does some digging and Sarah develops some suspicion as well, they learn that the women are all losing their memory after each night because they have all been given a perfume that causes memory loss. And each night, the men on the island are taking advantage of that by doing whatever they want to these women. And yes, there is a trigger warning at the beginning of this movie because there is the R word in this movie, which I don't want to say on YouTube because I don't want my video to get flagged. But yes, this is exactly what the men are doing to these women in this movie. Fortunately, the snake venom is an antidote for the memory loss that the flower perfume causes. This is why the men killed Jess. She was bit by the snake with that specific venom, and she began noticing some things about the place that were off to her. So she's the one who stole Cody's special knife when she realized the men had these awful intentions because in a quick flashback in Frida's memory, Frida sees Jess say, "Hide this," holding that knife, and Frida later sees that same knife in her room. Frida hid the knife, as Jess told her to, but forgot about it because of the perfume. And this is why the housekeeper recognized who Frida was when she arrived at the island. The housekeeper drinks that venom regularly, and Frida has been to the island before, which we'll get into very soon. That's also why she told Frida to shush when Frida saw the bottle of venom that she was drinking. This also makes me assume that everyone working on the island was also having their memory manipulated, and would never question any of the clues to what was going on. Also considering that they would be the ones that have to clean up after the chaos of every night. Frida eventually discovers these Polaroid photos of Slater giving away these red gift bags to many different male guests at the island. The reason for this is the red bags contain the perfume, which the men could use on women whenever they like, even after they've left the island. Frida also discovers a photo of herself at the island on another occasion, and as this venom antidote starts to kick in more and more, she remembers being at the island once before and continuing to be abused by Slater. That's where she got the scar, that's where she bit off Vic's missing finger, that's where she's always getting dragged to collect the dirt under her nails, and more subtly, in the rainforest, that's where she sees, and we see, the green lizard. At the very beginning of the film, we see that same green lizard right before we see Frida for the first time. That intro sequence with the lizard was a quick memory image, a recollection of seeing that lizard during that traumatic moment the previous time she was at the island. Which makes sense for her to recollect because at that moment she sees an image of the lizard she's painted on her nails. And if you want to get even more symbolic with this lizard, it's super clear to me that this lizard represents a massive theme to take away from this film, and that's why it's the very first image we see in the movie. It's the idea of blending into your environment, which is a natural predatory characteristic of the lizard and many other predators living in the green rainforest. The men in this movie are blending in as good friends, good partners, and even saviors to these women like Slater, almost literally lifting Frida out of a chaotic life of instability and stress and safely landing her in peace and paradise. And on this topic, I think the casting in this film is very purposeful to cast male actors who we are very used to seeing portray characters in a positive light. We look back upon these specific legendary actors fondly, making it very difficult to see them as villains, which plays into them blending into our perception. Christian Slater, one of the most charismatic and endearing actors of the 80s and 90s. Haley Joel Osment, iconically known for the role of an innocent, good-hearted, yet tortured child in The Sixth Sense. Kyle MacLachlan, best known for playing the virtuous special agent Dale Cooper in Twin Peaks. And Channing Tatum, known for years as a heartthrob sex symbol and soon after a very capable comedic actor as well. It's also easy to ignore or miss the wrongdoings of powerful people when they create this facade of helping you. This often causes us to create enemies out of the wrong people. This is why in the beginning of the film, we as the audience see through Frida's eyes that Sarah is the antagonist of the movie. But as Sarah and Frida start to reclaim their power, Sarah begins to shift into almost as much of a protagonist as Frida, and Slater becomes the main antagonist. Sarah also has a brief monologue about the societal conditioning of the competition between women for the validation of men. And in this story, we see these women get caught up in that and then break free from that. And when we get to the climax of this film, another massive issue is explored when we begin the conversation of cyclical trauma, when we find out that Slater was actually abused as a child. This is very obviously the psychological issue that sparked his abusive, predatory behavior as an adult now. And that's where you get that comedic, yet very dramatic scene, my favorite scene in the movie, honestly, where he keeps yelling, "I'm sorry," and then goes right back to a calm demeanor explaining how he has learned to forget his trauma. But very clearly, we can see that this trauma still haunts him and haunts others through him in the most horrific way possible. And that's often how we get some of the most awful monsters in our world among us today. The psychological term that this movie is revolving around thematically is called dissociative amnesia, when we forget significant events as a coping mechanism to repress the trauma associated with those events. We also have a character who represents the many people who know about awful things that are happening but prefer to be quiet about it. The character of Lucas, or those who enter a state of denial as a result of repressed trauma, like Stacy, who says she doesn't want to remember even when Frida tries to save her. So getting back to the story, what Frida did is put the flower perfume in Slater's vape when he was chasing Sarah, and then when Slater returned and smoked his vape, Slater completely forgot what was going on and why he was there. And also, just as a brief, subtle, clever symbol, the candles actually fall onto the Polaroid photos and burn them just as Slater's memories are beginning to fade. And in the end, this is all implied by the ending, but it's very clear that Frida uses Slater's weapon against him in the grandest way possible, by keeping him on the memory loss drug in various ways, slowly destroying his mind. Slater has the company transferred to Frida, who is the new CEO and also his wife. An ultimate form of revenge for the power Slater has taken from her and countless other women. All right, this is my analysis. Really hope you enjoyed. And if there's still any questions that you still have that are still unanswered, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them right away. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you later.